If you want to climb ELO as easily and quickly as possible, then there is one thing we'd recommend for most roles at SkillCapped. Stay off aggressive picks and play safe scaling champions. And we'd further emphasize that for the ADC role, for the role that has the least agency over early aggression, committing to such a playstyle when you don't know what you're doing is a recipe for disaster. There are so many reasons why low elo players falter when playing lane bully ADCs, such as their map awareness, trading, matchup knowledge, etc. But the one that matters the most and is focused on the least has got to be early wave manipulation. In this guide, we'll take a look at how different ADC players lost the lane within 5 minutes due to their poor knowledge and how to fix it. So let's get into it. For our first replay, let's watch how a silver ELO draven loses the lane literally within the first 10 seconds. Check to see if you notice what he does wrong. Alright, so as Nautilus and Jhin have made their way into the lane, did you spot the critical mistake Draven already made, which made this lane much harder than it needed to be? Not hitting the wave at all before his opponents were in lane was the correct answer here. We assume many of our viewers watch pro League of Legends streams. Do you notice how frequently high elo players complain about having to leash for their junglers? It is incredibly frustrating to do so, as it can absolutely dictate the pace of the lane entirely when one side can be in lane immediately taking control of the wave. It's particularly important in this matchup, as Draven is paired with a Lulu versus a Nautilus support. In general, when you have a ranged support versus a melee one, you generally want to have the wave advantage so that you can't be engaged on easily. So what we'd recommend Draven to do is auto attack the minions a couple of times with his Q. You don't have to spam autos, but 2 to 3 attacks on the wave before your opponents get there can guarantee perpetual lane control. And specifically for Draven, it would allow him to build up 2 spinning axes before his opponents are even in lane, so that when he does fight, he can pump out a ton of damage. One of the biggest problems with not aiming to build that early wave advantage versus a melee support as well is that they can very quickly execute minions with their support item. If you're on even footing with them, then when the second wave arrives, they can very easily look to spike level 2 on you. As you can see, despite the range advantage, Nautilus and Jhin hit 2 at roughly the same time, and that's with Nautilus wasting one of his support stacks on the first wave. So, when Draven goes to fight, both sides are even in strength and wave size, so the stronger all-in from the melee support relative to the enchanter turns this into Jhin's favor, and Draven falls to a very easily avoidable death. Now, was this poor fight entirely because Draven didn't auto the first wave? No, he mechanically played this horribly, but that's about what you'd expect from a silver player. But if he had set himself up for success, then his mechanics wouldn't matter at all, and he'd have easily taken over this lane with basic macro. Let's compare how this silver Draven played to an incredible ADC like Han Sama on Draven in a very similar matchup. Just like before, he's paired with an enchanter support versus an all-in engage one. So notice how at the start of the lane, he's already positioned ready to start hitting the wave. Unlike the previous Draven, Hans doesn't have the luxury of his opponent's leashing, so instead, he abuses the fact that in this matchup, he has a ranged advantage with his support and begins hitting the wave as it comes in, rather than after it has already crashed. Something we want to make note of here as well is that Hans only autoed the wave a single time and then proceeded to play to zone rather than build a big wave lead. The reason for this is pretty simple. As you get better, you'll begin to understand what your opponents can and cannot do. With just a single auto, he has wave control secure, but he's also aware that his opponents can't try to sneak wave control back. If Jhin were to try and fight for wave control, then each time he autos the wave, Hans would match it with an auto of his own. Not only this, but Jhin trying to do that would more often put him into harass range where Hans could look to chunk him down. So basically you only want to auto attack once so that your wave pushes as slowly as it possibly can. This gives you the longest amount of time where you can zone your opponents and harass them whenever they walk up to try and last hit minions. Alright, let's take a look at the rewards from these solid fundamentals. After clearing the initial 3 waves for himself, Hans has last hit every single minion while harassing both Jhin and Rakan to half health each. Not only that, but because Jhin is forced to concede waves and last hit under tower while under pressure, once his own 3rd wave has fully died, he missed 8 creeps in total. That's nearly half the minions from the initial 3 waves. Suffice to say, this lane phase was not pretty for the guy in the mask. Alright, let's move on to a higher elo example for a less obvious but very common mistake that we see as well. For this one, we'll take a look at a gold elo Caitlyn within a Mumu versus Ezreal and Pyke. At the start of the lane, Caitlyn is doing effectively the same thing that the previous draven did. She's just standing AFK, doing nothing. That being said, it's technically okay in this lane, simply because of how much more control of the wave a Caitlyn has over Ezreal early on anyway. As they begin to engage each other, Caitlyn starts looking to build both a wave lead and harass her opponents. Nothing wrong there, as this should be your game plan in any Caitlyn lane. But as she does so, can you spot something Caitlyn is doing very poorly as she's executing that game plan? This won't be our main focus, but it's by far one of the biggest issues players face when they play aggressive picks. The whole point of you having lane control is to build a lead over your opponents. When you're so tunnel visioned on harassing them and not focused on CSing, then there is almost zero point in playing these types of champions. Caitlyn missed so many easy last hits, especially when she was trying to interact with her opponents. It sounds silly, but the best thing you can do to become a better aggressive player is to learn how to play passively and score every single last hit without much thought. And once you're comfortable at doing that, then you can move on to both CSing and harassing at the same time. You'll find it's much harder to learn how to do either of those things if you're trying to focus on learning both at the same time. Moving on, Caitlyn continues using her matchup advantage to pressure a crash onto the enemy Ezreal. But look closely at what's happening and see if you can spot the big error Caitlyn just made. So Caitlyn's poorly timed crash is what you should have been aware of. Looking back, Caitlyn had two options at this point in time: crash on the third wave or the fourth wave. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter which one she chooses at this elo, as both are fine options. The problem is her execution. Take a look at what happened when the third wave arrived in the lane. Caitlyn begins by not really rushing to hit it, just standing around. Then she starts to hit it a bit. And then she transitions to this weird period of either hitting the wave or sometimes just walking back and forth, briefly doing nothing. Either way, she's not committed to any one strategy. So why is this bad? Simple. By hitting the wave, she's ensuring it crashes before the fourth wave. But by not committing to hitting it, she's giving her opponents more and more time to thin the crash before it gets to their tower. And more importantly, the eventual crash, as you saw, ended up looking like this. As you can see, the crash happens precisely as the incoming enemy wave is getting to their tower. This type of crash makes harassing significantly worse. Your opponents now have a buffer of minions that will draw aggro and block your skill shots as you try to harass them under tower. Not only that, but you have less time to actually harass them, since you're now preoccupied with last hitting as well, and of course the wave is going to die out faster because there's less of it. That's precisely what happened during this Caitlyn's crash. It was so frail that she barely had any time to play aggressive at their tower before Pyke walked around just for minions to easily kill her. Now, again, just like the draven before, Caitlyn's death was not because of her poor crash, but if you set yourself up for failure, then things are much more likely to go wrong. Do things correctly and everything seems easy in the first place. So let's take a look at how a high elo ADC player does things. This Caitlyn, unlike the one before, didn't look to push too aggressively early on. Instead, she froze the wave and slow pushed it for a considerable amount of the lane to zone her opponents. It's irrelevant to what we're learning, just letting you know what happened here. Eventually though, the wave was getting really big and she was looking to crash. During the sixth wave, notice that the second it comes into the lane, she shifts full gear to start pushing it. But we do have some critiques here still. Her Q could have been angled better to hit the whole wave. Caitlyn also often had to stop auto-attacking because she had a very poor plan on how to effectively kill this wave as quickly as possible. A higher elo concept, which again is irrelevant for what we're teaching you here, but we're just trying to make a point. Basically, she didn't crash this as quickly as she could have, but the simple fact that she understood that she should crash quickly at that timing is the reason for her following success. Notice the difference from before. There's no buffer wave to protect Ezreal and Rel from Caitlyn and Thresh's skill shots for a little while. This opened up an opportunity for them to find a kill window onto the rel. Now, of course, a slow push isn't always going to grant you a free kill, but do you see how much easier things look with a properly timed big crash? A big level lead from a massive slow push and no buffer minions makes life so simple. Compare that to the previous Caitlyn, and you could have Uzi level mechanics and it would be difficult to land harass here. Moving on though, the very first thing that lane bully players think about when it comes to improvement is how to trade better, how to find all-ins and kill their opponent, etc. Yes, all of that does matter, but it will be infinitely easier to pull off if your wave control prior to the fight is good in the first place. It's almost always the case when we review games that the player with the better wave control wins out in the end. It's just unfortunate that it happens to be the last thing people think about after someone either wins or loses an engagement.
So you might be asking yourself, why go to SkillCapped.com to improve when I could just watch YouTube guides or play the game? Well, let me show you. Let's say you're an AD carry who's struggling to climb the ladder. Not only would you get over 55 site exclusive courses for AD carry, but maybe really what you've been struggling with is wave control in bot lane. Well, we got you covered with 6 different courses breaking down wave control as an AD carry. Not only do we have the largest catalog of guides for League of Legends in the entire world with over 1,500 videos to watch, but these are then curated by the top coaches and players into courses on every skill and topic you need to master in order to truly improve and climb the ladder. If all of this wasn't enough, we haven't even touched on our catalog of over 700 Smurf commentaries, where a challenger expert shows you how to climb out of your rank and you're guaranteed to get any questions answered by them directly. Not to mention, we're the only service to offer a rank improvement guarantee. If you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using SkillCapped, you can claim a refund, no questions asked. So what are you waiting for? Head to SkillCapped.com and get the rank you've always wanted. Link in the description below.
Anyway, we hope that you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.